The sixth characteristic common to traditional diets has to do with the preparation of seeds, grains, nuts, legumes. All of these types of foods were consumed in these cultures, but only after a very careful period of preparation that involves soaking, sprouting, fermenting, or natural leavening, which is a type of fermentation process. And that's because seeds, like grains and legumes, contain inhibitors, blockers, and even compounds that are toxic to humans. So by these careful preparation processes, the enzyme inhibitors are deactivated. All seeds contain enzyme inhibitors. Now, we just learned about how important enzymes are. You want to have lots of enzymes in your diet, and you don't want to take 2 steps backwards by having a lot of inhibitors in your diet, because they will make digestion very difficult for you. Phytic acid is present in grains and legumes. This is a mineral blocker. It prevents the absorption of calcium, magnesium, copper, iron, and especially zinc. It's very difficult to get zinc out of these foods. In fact, it blocks the absorption of zinc. Tannins and lectins can be very irritating. The complex starches and sugars in these types of foods are very difficult to digest, and the gluten is not only difficult to digest, but for some people it's very toxic. And cellulose is impossible for humans to digest. So proper preparation makes these foods more digestible and their nutrients more available to humans. The herbivore, the animal that lives on grasses and seeds, has a complex digestive system that has from 2 to 4 stomachs, and at least one of these stomachs will act as a holding tank where fermentation takes place with special bacteria. The human stomach, although there are many variations, large and small, is a simple stomach, and we are simply not designed to digest these types of foods. We also have a very short intestinal tract compared to the herbivores. The gorilla, who is the same height as the man, has a lot more area for digestion than the human does. The human being actually has a relatively simple digestive tract. A lot of our disk space, so to speak, goes to the nervous system and not to the digestive tract. So we have to use our brains more or less to figure out how to pre-digest these types of food before we eat them. Basically, when we are doing this careful preparation, we are doing what happens in some of these stomachs of the herbivores. What happens in this careful preparation is that we are imitating nature. All of these inhibitors and phytic acid and so forth are equivalent to a plastic coating around the seed. They are the seed's preservatives. And that's what keeps the inside of the seed completely fresh until it's time to germinate and sprout. And then all of the nutrients are fresh and available to the plant. Well, you don't want to eat preservatives, not even natural preservatives. So when we are carefully preparing our food, we are actually neutralizing these preservatives and allowing the seed to sprout. And the 4 factors that make this possible are moisture, warmth, slight acidity, and time. And when these methods are used, they are employing these 4 factors. We'll come back later and look at some specific examples in cooking. But this is a photograph of a Cherokee woman, and she is preparing the typical Cherokee bread, which is made from a cooked cornmeal that's then wrapped in a corn leaf, a dried corn leaf. This is the original tamale, and it was then fermented for 2 weeks. It was put aside for 2 weeks, and only then did they eat the cornbread. They also then took the fermented cornmeal and mixed it with water to make a fermented beverage. In southern Mexico, they do the same thing, but they wrap the corn in banana leaves. It's called pozole. It's put aside for 2 weeks, and the banana leaves become covered with green mold, sort of like blue cheese. And they eat the whole thing with the mold and everything, and it's considered a complete food. Since we are talking about grains and legumes, we need to address soy foods for a moment, because the soybean is a legume. And like all legumes, the soybean contains toxins. But the difference between the soybean and most legumes is that the soybean's toxins are very difficult to get rid of. They don't go away with just the typical type of soaking and cooking that you can use for other types of beans. In Asia, they never just boil up soybeans and eat them because they know that they're very toxic. Soybeans are very high in phytic acid, which is the blocker. It blocks the absorption of calcium, magnesium, iron, copper, and especially zinc. Best way to get zinc deficient in a real quick hurry is to eat a lot of soy. Soy also contains some very powerful enzyme inhibitors that block the digestion of protein. And when these are fed to animals, you get hypertrophy of the pancreas, an unnatural or pathogenic enlargement of the pancreas because the pancreas is working so hard, and this often can lead to pancreatitis. Unique to soy compared to other beans that we normally eat are the isoflavones. These are a type of estrogen-like compound in the soy. You can never get rid of this in normal processing, not fermentation or anything like that. And they are goitrogens. They block thyroid function, they cause depression of thyroid function, and also endocrine disruption. These are estrogenic compounds. They will lower cholesterol. They are sterols that lower cholesterol, and that's why, of course, they can call soy a health food because it lowers cholesterol. But believe me, that's not something that you want to do. Cholesterol is your very best friend. Lectins can be irritating to the gastrointestinal tract. Manganese is an important nutrient, but you do not want to give manganese to growing children. Milk is low in manganese, especially for infants. You don't want. Very concerned about the soy infant formula with the high levels of manganese. Violent prisoners tend to have very high levels of manganese in their brains, and the symptoms of manganese poisoning are identical to the symptoms of autism. Inability to make emotional contact with the outside world. And oxalates are very high and can lead to kidney stones. So there's a whole cocktail of concerns here in the soy foods. And in Asia, what they do is ferment the soy foods for anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. And that gets rid of almost everything except the isoflavones. So they don't eat soy in large amounts, and they eat it in the context of a diet that's very supportive of thyroid health. The Japanese diet has very high levels of iodine and fish, and that's a very good diet for the thyroid gland. So they can eat a little bit of soy and not have problems with it. And I do want to distinguish between these traditional foods, which are mostly fermented or prepared in a way that gets rid of most of the toxins. They are consumed in small amounts in the context of a nutritious traditional diet, versus the modern soy foods, which are processed foods. They're added to a lot of familiar foods, like soy being added to hamburgers, soy is added to bread, and then all of these imitation foods. And then soy being consumed in inappropriate ways, like tofu cheesecake and tofu lasagna and so forth. And then, you know, to make matters even worse, they've actually isolated these isoflavones and they're selling them as supplements, especially to women. I can't stress enough that soy foods are imitation foods. They are packaged and flavored and presented to look like the foods that they are replacing. And the industry would love for you to consume these foods rather than the real foods. There's a lot more profit on soy milk than there is on real milk.